The day the envelope showed up, it wasn't the wind that made my flag snap and crack against the halyard. It was my pulse, loud as a drum, a warning in my chest that something mean was about to happen. The paper was thick, smug even, with a gold seal that caught the morning light like a little badge of authority. 3 lines in, my coffee went cold. For $1,200 in fines, plus administrative penalties, for the flagpole my grandfather set in this yard before I was born. I live in a place called Willow Ridge, a neighborhood where lawns look like magazine ads, and people wave with the exact number of fingers that says friendly, but not too friendly. We have an HOA, and the HOA has a president, Marisol Vega, who wears tailored blazers to mailbox clusters the way other people wear hoodies. She has that smile people practice in car mirrors, the one that says she's following the rules, and if you aren't, well, she's just as disappointed as she is delighted to write you up. I wasn't surprised the envelope came from her. I was surprised by how angry it made me, like heat in my ears, like someone had put their hand on a family photo and kept it there too long. Because that flagpole isn't just aluminum and rope and a cleat that squeaks when you pull it tight. It's my grandfather's story shipyards, double shifts, a folded flag on a shadowed day. He set that pole the summer the elms were still towering and the streetlights still hummed, and he poured the concrete himself, whistling a tune he never quite finished. I grew up pacing the circle of that footing with a toy truck, learning what boundaries feel like under your feet. And now a woman with a clipboard was telling me the thing that anchored our yard was an eyesore, a safety hazard, out of compliance with visual harmony. I called the number at the bottom of the letter and got a syrupy voicemail. If this is about a violation, please refer to your resident handbook, Section 9, Subpart C. I left a message anyway, polite, but edged asking for a meeting. That evening I walked the block, letting my temper cool with the light. Walt, my neighbor with the permanent baseball cap and a lawn like a putting green, shook his head when I told him. I'd just pay it and be done, he said, voice real soft, like we were discussing a weather pattern and not my grandfather's concrete. You don't want a target on your back. That phrase target on your back stuck like a splinter. I waved it off and went home to a sleepless night that smelled like grass and printer toner. The meeting wasn't really a meeting. It was a stage. Marisol was at the center of a long table in our community room, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, and I was in a chair that wobbled on one leg if you shifted your weight. Mr. Cole, she began, my last name balanced on her tongue like a marble. This isn't personal. The pole violates our updated standards. We pride ourselves on a clean look in Willow Ridge. I told her the pole predates any handbook she waved around. I told her my grandfather's permit if I could find it would outvote every bullet point she'd underlined. She smiled the way you smile at a toddler insisting the moon follows your car. We'll continue fines until compliance is achieved, she said. That's how community works. Here's the thing. I didn't plan on fighting anyone this year. I planned on fixing the garage door, finally staining the deck, maybe hosting a barbecue where the conversation didn't throb with HOA gossip. But there are moments you can feel the chessboard under your feet, and you realize someone moved a piece while you were looking at your phone. That night, I took a legal pad and wrote down everything I could think of. Grandfather's name, year the pole went up, the contractor he might have called for the concrete delivery. Then I went to the place community power never quite reaches, our public library, where the air is dry and the tables are scuffed and the silence is kind. I started with property records, working from microfilm to the county's digital archive. I called my mom and listened to her say, "Oh, honey, I swear your granddad kept that permit somewhere crazy, like the back of a photo frame." I came home, pulled every frame off the hallway walls, and left a trail of nails like tiny black commas. No permit. I climbed into the attic where the air tastes like dust and lost summers, opened a trunk that still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco, and there it was cracking at the folds, stamped with an ancient state seal, authorizing one freestanding flagpole not to exceed 25 feet. Issued the same year my grandfather and I were in matching flannel at a 4th of July parade. I sat back on my heels and cried, not big operatic sobs, just that quiet, released kind of crying that happens when a knot finally gives. The next morning, I took the permit to Priya Shah, who lives 2 doors down and, as it turns out, used to clerk for a judge. Priya is one of those people you underestimate at your peril. Cardigan, garden gloves, mine like a steel trap. They'll say standards change, she said, scanning the paper. But you can't retroactively erase a lawfully permitted structure without due process. Also, visual harmony isn't a legal term, it's a perfume. She gave me the name of an attorney she trusted, and I spent the last of my rainy day fund hiring Nora Kim, who has a courtroom voice like glass clear, sharp, reflective. Meanwhile, the fines kept rolling in, each notice colder than the last. Marisol started leaving them tucked behind the brass knocker on my door, as if she were hand-delivering scripture. At the next HOA meeting, I brought the permit, neat in a protective sleeve, and asked to speak. Marisol let out a breath like I'd told a joke that didn't land. "Mr. Cole," she said, "we'll review your materials after you address the administrative balance on your account." I set the permit down in front of her anyway. "You don't get to pretend this was never approved," I said, keeping my voice level. She didn't look at the paper. She looked at me. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," she said, and there was a flick in her tone I recognized from 100 schoolyard standoffs. "Take it down, put up a wall mount like everyone else, and we can talk about forgiveness." The room got quiet as a chapel. I heard Walt shift in his chair. I heard my own heartbeat, steady now, like shoes on a path. "No," I said. "We're done pretending." Nora filed in county court, and suddenly all the things that happen in the shadows gossip threads, next door whispering, passive-aggressive notices about trash cans had to stand under lights. We gathered evidence. The permit, photographs of the pole through the years, copies of the HOA's own declarations before they got polished into corporate language. Priya found a case where a judge called an HOA's aesthetic rationale arbitrary and unevenly enforced, which is lawyer code for "you made it up as you went along." Nora requested communications between board members and discovered notes where Marisol referred to problem properties and visual discipline, phrases that sound neat on a newsletter and ugly in a transcript. The hearing day smelled like lemon cleaner and nerves. I wore the only suit that still fits me if I don't exhale too hard, and Marisol came in with a binder you could prop a door open with. Her lawyer crisp, dry argued that community standards must evolve, that uniformity protects property values, that our bylaws permit enforcement up to removal. Nora stood, pointed to the permit, and said, "This is not a stylistic choice. This is a lawful structure. You can't bulldoze legality to manicure feelings." She walked the judge through the lineage of our property dates, signatures, 5x7 photographs of me and my grandfather by that pole with popsicles melting down our wrists. She held up the HOA's own documents from the year the pole went up, which didn't include a single prohibition against freestanding flagpoles, only vague guidance about tasteful display. And then Nora did this thing I didn't see coming. She played a recording Priya had taken at the previous meeting, where Marisol, thinking the mic was off, said to another board member, "I don't care what he finds in his antiquary, not a used car lot." You could feel the oxygen shift. The judge's eyebrows did the smallest arch, a punctuation mark more powerful than any gavel. Marisol's counsel objected on relevance. The judge overruled. "It goes to intent," she said, calm as a clock. I took the stand. I didn't try to be heroic. I just told the truth the way you tell someone your address. I said, "This pole has been part of our home longer than my mortgage, longer than most of our roofs, longer than the HOA existed in its current form. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking that a lawful thing remain lawful." I said the fines felt less like rules and more like pressure designed to make me fold. Community isn't tidy lawns and synchronized wreaths, I heard myself say. It's knowing when your neighbor's porch light means come over, we've got pie. Marisol didn't look at me while I talked. She stared at a spot on the table like she was reading captions no one else could see. When she spoke, she used the word precedent as if it were a broom. "If we allow this," she said, "we invite 1,000 exceptions." Nora let her finish and then said, "That's the difference between authority and power. Authority respects the boundaries of the law. Power just pushes until something gives." I wanted to applaud. I kept my hands still. The judge took a brief recess. I stood in the hallway with Priya while Walt approached with his hat in his hand like he'd just stepped into a sanctuary. "I was wrong," he said, voice small. "I thought keeping the peace meant paying to make the noise stop. But that's not peacy, it's quiet someone else owns." I nodded, throat tight, grateful beyond words. When the judge returned, she didn't drag it out. The plaintiff has demonstrated that the structure in question was lawfully permitted and installed, she said, reading from notes that sounded like scripture to me, the good kind. The association's updated standards cannot retroactively render it unlawful. The ongoing fines are vacated. The flagpole may remain. The court finds that the association's enforcement, in this instance, was arbitrary. She paused and looked up, and there was the smallest flare of impatience in her eyes. And frankly, unneighborly. You know that feeling when a storm breaks and the smell of rain hangs around like a benediction? It was like that. We stepped outside into a sun that had the decency to be warm without being cocky, and the wind lifted just enough to stir the flag over the courthouse. Nora shook my hand. Priya smiled in that way that says you've done something simple and hard at the same time. Even Marisol's lawyer softened, just a shade, like he'd remembered he was a person under the suit. Back in Willow Ridge, things didn't transform overnight. People don't turn into better versions of themselves because a judge used the word arbitrary. But something shifted. The next HOA meeting was packed faces I'd never seen there, voices that didn't carry the trained hesitance of, is it okay if I ask? Walt spoke up and said, we need to review enforcement with actual fairness, and the room hummed. Marisol kept her seat at the head of the table, but she didn't look as tall in it. Someone proposed a committee to update the handbook with public comment and legal review. Someone else suggested a grace period for any non-safety violations. It was messy, a little loud, and for the first time, I thought, this is what a neighborhood sounds like when it's awake. That evening, I came home to a yard that felt both exactly the same and entirely different. I set a ladder against the pole carefully, the way my grandfather taught me, and oiled the cleat so the rope would stop squeaking. I raised the flag slow, hand over hand, hearing the small metal clink of the clips against the pole, tasting the kind of tired that means you've used your strength for something that matters. The sunset was one of those bruised, beautiful ones, all purples and deep oranges, and for a second I thought about calling my mom, then decided to let the moment keep its quiet. Across the street, a couple I barely knew walked by with their dog and gave me a thumbs up that felt, oddly, like an apology. Priya's porch light clicked on, warm and steady. Walt stood at his curb like he might say something, then just tipped the brim of his cap. My phone buzzed with messages, neighbors asking for Nora's number, folks from the other side of the subdivision sharing pictures of their own grandfathers, someone posting in the community forum. Maybe uniformity isn't the point after all. Here's what I keep turning over in my head. The day after our win, I saw Marisol at the mailbox cluster. She didn't look at me at first, pulled her letters with that same precise motion, then said, I never meant to make it personal. I said, it always is, though, because homes are personal. She nodded, and for a breath there was a softness I hadn't seen. Then the mask returned, and she walked away. I don't know if she'll run again for president. I don't know if she should. I do know that power is a muscle neighborhoods can either strengthen in one person or share among many, and we decided to share a little more. So now when the wind picks up at Willow Ridge and the flag lifts, it's not a victory banner, it's a reminder. Rules can shape a place, but they can't be the place. Aesthetics can guide a block, but they can't measure a life. And history, if you're lucky, is something you can touch, cool metal under your fingertips, a rope that leaves a faint pattern on your palm, a story that doesn't need a megaphone to be heard. I'll tell you one more thing that keeps me up. Where do we draw the line between what keeps a community beautiful and what makes it brittle? And I know what it bought breathing room, not just for me, but for the kid who'll grow up riding a bike around that concrete circle, learning what boundaries feel like under his feet. If you've ever had to stand up to a board, to a bossy neighbor, to a rule that served power more than people, drop your story below. Tell me where you land on this. Was I right to fight, or did I make waves over something small? Do HOAs protect value or smother it? What would you have done in my shoes?